can you please explain just kind of what NAFO is and why you started it?
Well, at this point, it's rather difficult to explain because it's thousand things all at once, right? So it started as a joke, let's say. Then it turned into fundraising, and then just people developed it themselves into countering propaganda, um, starting their own sub-organizations, like you've seen in Netherlands. I can't remember the name of the organization right now, but it's like this NAFO thing, which now does its own thing in Netherlands when they fundraise money for ambulances, right? So it's difficult to describe, right? And I'd like to say I started it. I mean, I started the fella, right? And I started NAFO, but the fundraising part, which really elevated the whole thing, was started by somebody on Twitter called Zambo Nick, who goes by El Greco, because he was like the very first person to donate money for a fella, right? Um, I'd like to say it was my idea to fundraise money that way, but to be perfectly honest with you, when I first done it and there was like seven fellas in the queue, I thought about it, but I thought to myself, nobody's ever gonna pay any money for that for anything. And then I had to eat my words because within a month we had about $60,000 raised, right?
Do you have any idea of how big it kind of the group? It's kind of an intangible thing, so I guess it's quite difficult. But yeah, do you have any idea of how big the group is, or how large the kind of scale of the operation has become since you kind of first initially began it?
Well, we began with $20. We're right now about 10 plus million American dollars, right? Some people say 15, but I'm bad at math, but they're even worse, so I can't believe them with that. And I'd say anywhere between 40 to 150,000, but it's difficult to estimate how many fellas there are.
Do you consider yourself and kind of what you're doing as like activism, or pre you starting it, did you consider yourself an activist, and would you now?
Um, oh, definitely not. I mean, like, if you're an activism, it's like a lifelong thing, right? And this for me started basically when the war started full scale, because obviously it started in 2014 on the as a insurgency in Donbass, which they still like to pretend that it was an insurgency. And right now, when it started as a full scale war, I was like, you know what? We can do something about this. Because this is this whole principle, right? You can't help everybody, but everybody can help somebody, right? So, me, myself, as a person, I couldn't help everyone. But 40,000 people or even 100,000 people, they can all help someone, right? So it's like, I don't actually see myself as anything, but I see this as a collective effort, always have seen it as that. And it's basically what people believe in. Like, if some people believe they're activists, but I'm just basically a bystander, right? I do my thing, I help in whichever way I can, but I can't really call myself an activist.
The kind of stuff you're kind of doing with NAFO could kind of be, I guess, because you're essentially trolling like the Russian government and the Russian propaganda machine, and I guess, but the way you're doing it is comical and funny using the Shiba Inu dog. So I guess some people could kind of laugh off what you're doing as not important. But arguably, you're obviously doing a lot more than that, and kind of what you're doing is important and making a difference in the grand scheme of the war.
Well, I call it diplomacy through idiocy, right? Because it's like this whole thing is all very ironic, right? And it's basically what's the funniest thing that can happen and how can we achieve it, right? And it comes to a point where it all becomes so surreal that it's difficult to counter, right? So you could see on Twitter like all these very serious Russian politicians, like their Western mouthpieces, right? They come to a point where what we're doing is so surreal, they start to believe it's true. And we find ourselves, this whole CIA doesn't exist, right? We are now 18 months in, 18, 15, 18 months, and they're still pushing it that this whole NAFO thing, it's not a collective effort, it's all from America, it's all by the intelligence agencies, yada, 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 right? And it kind of, to normal people, right? If you're a, let's say, the silent majority, right? And you go on Twitter and you see like this 1 million follower account that supports Russia, and they fire off 20 tweets about dogs working for the CIA, like you're gonna think to yourself, that guy's absolutely insane, right? And it kind of exposes people who usually wouldn't even say a word about what's going on to this side where they can see that they can do something, not themselves, but with others, right? So this Ulyanov tweet from a year ago where the men are conflicted got Ulyanov to reply, right? It made people realize that these people aren't invincible, right? As we fought before with Syria and Georgia in 2008, they can actually be, well, baited into responses, right? They can be belittled and humiliated online, right? So people figured out if we put some time and effort into this, we can accelerate the rate at which it happens. And now we came to a point where we had the Russian NFA talk about NAFO, right? I mean, I'm glad that it happened because the more time they think about dogs, the less they can spread their propaganda and their defense of their war crimes, right? So I'm all for it. I hope more time of their day is taken by dogs.
And you, the body, has been recognised by lots of influential kind of people and bodies in the West, like NATO and in Ukraine, like President Zelensky, etc. Um, I guess what has the response been like from those bodies, like, and especially from Ukraine, who are trying to help and who you are essentially helping? What's the response been like there?
Well, if you'd like to know how keen the Ukrainian government is on NAFO, so when we had the Vilnius summit, where we've been awarded the Star of Diplomacy from Lithuania, I've got a message at around 10 p.m. local time from Reznikov's, I believe she's his assistant or an advisor, I can't remember right now. Irina Zolotar is her name, right? And the message was that Mr. Reznikov, or rather Minister Reznikov, saw the painting and he would love to sign it as soon as possible, right? So if what we did had no impact on people like Reznikov or Ukrainian government or Lithuanian government, that would have never happened, right? And it wasn't like, oh, we saw the painting, or we can sign it for some publicity, right? No, they went out of their way because that was when the NATO summit was starting, right? They went out of their way to sign it because they knew that we can fundraise more with the signed painting, and that's what happened right after it. We got around 8,000 for a painting that was initially auctioned for 1,000, right? And they understand. I mean, at least Ukrainian government understand that what we're doing is valuable, right? Because they, as the government, they have to pick and choose which units they support and how, because obviously resources are finite, right? And they know that we, as a third party, can support the units that they can't reach themselves. Because like if you try to buy like $10,000 drone for every unit, and there is hundreds of them, the money will run out, and the drones in the market would run out, right? So I think I like to believe they value what we do, but I can't look into their heads and see what's going on in there, right?
And you kind of touched on it, I guess, in your last not that answer, previous answer, but obviously there's like some rumors by pro-Russian kind of sources that yeah, you're a front for Western intelligence. I just wondered what your kind of response would be to those rumors.
Well, I wish it was true because I wouldn't have to live from payday to payday, right? Scraping by. I'd love to work for the intelligence. If somebody out there would like to pay me, I'll take it, right? But now, like, I know that there are people who like are very keen on us, right? From those spheres, especially from NATO itself, right? Because like very early on, like August, July of last year, I've got a message from someone who works closely with NATO, right? And they send me and other people who are like in our group. They send us a message that some NATO officers spend their days checking Twitter to see which new dogs showed up today. You know how you can recognize that we don't work with any governments because if we worked with a government, this thing would have been dead a long time ago, right? Because that's what governments do best. They take something, they kill it. It's like there's always this one guy in a pressed suit with a top hat on, right? And he does his absolute best to ruin everything and take all the credit in the process, right? So that's why I'm taking like a more laissez-faire approach to all of it. Like I don't dictate, I don't demand, I don't tell people what to do because the second you start doing it, right, you start disparaging people, right? Because suddenly they no longer do what they like to do, but they're doing what you want them to do, right? So there's no more of the enthusiasm about it, right? You kill the joy of it. Once you kill the joy from something, like you just kill it altogether.
Do you and other people who create for NAFO, so you might have just said it there, do you make money off of the things that you do, or no, not at all? It all goes to Ukraine.
Well, like the 99% of our fundraising comes through all the external like fundraisers that we do, so with units, with other charities and things like that. But we have our store that we sell things through, right? So the t-shirts, the prints, and overwhelming majority of it goes to Ukraine to a point where we sometimes put ourselves in the red. And I take a minimum wage salary every month, month and a half, which is, it's not great, but it's like if I go working somewhere full time, I have to leave this behind. So I'd rather scrape by from month to month, right? So for example, today I've already spent. We have 3 o'clock, quarter past three, and I've already spent 9 hours working today, right? Like my time working on NAFO daily is between 16 to 20 hours. If I sleep 3 4 hours a day, I see as a success. But like before the summit, so we were all in a rush. I slept twice a week for like a month straight. It wasn't great.
NAFO is kind of come up through the ranks through using Twitter. And obviously, Twitter's kind of gone through a bit of a rebranding with Elon Musk kind of taking over and developing it into X. And people are kind of leaving the platform as he's done that. And I guess I'm wondering if you're concerned for how that will necessarily impact the kind of work that you're doing with NAFO on that platform.
I mean, not one bit, to be honest, because I've already seen people do like these massive posts. Oh, because of Elon Musk, I'm leaving Twitter, this, and that. 2 days later, they straight back in like nothing happened, right? It's like people would like to leave to a different platform, right? But the thing that Facebook made, what was it called? Threads, I think. So it lasted what, 2 days? People, oh, we're going to Threads. You know what? We're coming back to whatever Twitter is called now. It's like like sometimes even I would like to leave for some other platform, but at the end of the day, you can't really leave anywhere because like all the blue skies and Threads, the one that's called like these prehistoric animal. What is it called? Mammoth? I can't remember. You can go there, right? But you go there and it's just crickets. Because like the vast majority of people, like they don't care if it's X, they don't care if it's Twitter, they don't care if it's Elon Musk, they don't care if it's anybody else, right? To them, it's just a platform. It means what's it called? Who's in charge? It means absolutely nothing, right? So like we all like to throw a fit, right? So when Elon did that thing where you were limited to see a number of tweets per day, right? That was horrendous thing. And if that stayed on, people would have left. Because if you're like me and you follow 1,000 people, you open Twitter and your daily limits go instantly, right? And it doesn't help that every second tweet is an ad, right? So if that would have stayed, that would have killed them. But they smartened up real quick.
Where do you think NAFO will go when the Ukraine war ends? Do you kind of think that it's taken on enough of a life of its own to kind of sustain now, kind of outside of the framework of the war in Ukraine?
Well, first thing first, right? I don't like to worry about tomorrow because there is enough to worry about today, right? And I know that people are very positive about all this when the war ends. It's not gonna be in a month. It's not gonna be in a year. It might not be within this decade, right? Because we're now at the point where there are defensive fortifications, and what would have been a week-long counterattack is now a 6 months-long counterattack for all the landmines, trenches, pillboxes, right? So We kind of missed the boat on that one. We're sending all the tanks and heavy equipment, but it is what it is. But there's obviously going to be a rebuilding process, right? And if NAFO can be a conduit to help people rebuild Ukraine, right? Because I think at that point, when the military stuff ends, I think like the NAFO story and all this, like there won't be any need for it, right? Because from then on, it's gonna be a more peaceful and passive time, right? It's not gonna be as time as urgent as it is currently, right? So you're not gonna have a unit which needs a drone within a week, right? You're gonna have a school that needs to be rebuilt within a year, right? So we can still do it, but there's not gonna be need for like extremely urgent fundraising, right? And of course, when the rebuilding process comes, there'll be every government from Europe and from states will want to like chip in, right? With ulterior motives, of course, but they'll help. But like I said, like there's no need to think about tomorrow because you don't know if you'll see the end of the day, right?
There's 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 been online. There's been a couple of articles about you saying that you have kind of far right like leanings and ideologies, and I was just wondering if you had a response to that, or what you kind of if you want to say anything about that.
Well, I said it like months ago at this point. But if I believed in those things and had those ideologies, right, the far right and whatnot, right now I'd be fundraising for battle things, for Russians. I'm not doing what I'm doing right now, right? Because I think there is a clear cut line if you go. It's not just far right, because if you look at all the pro Russians, right, it's extreme far right and it's extreme far left, right? So the people who support Ukraine, they're all somewhat central, right? I know the schizos who support Russia, they're usually very far left and extremely far right, right? And you can see it, like if you like follow people on Twitter, right? And you had those who were like like all the pro green parties, right? And now they're in this point where we need to stop supplying weapons to Ukraine to stop the war. And then you have the extremely far right doing exactly the same, right? It's almost as if these people were always believing in the same thing and may or may not have been paid by the same by the same people, right? Because there's this belief that the far left and far right in Europe and America was being bankrolled by Russia for a very long time, right? And you could see that far left in Germany before the war, they were heavily against nuclear power, right? Heavily against coal mines and becoming reliant on Russian gas, right? And the war kicked off. New nuclear power plants, all you can now do is buy Russian gas, right? So I honestly believe that if somebody is genuinely far right or genuinely extremely far left, they wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now, right? It's I like to see what we're doing. Like we are the relatively normal, stable people, right? And then all the fringes are all supporting Russia because like I used that as a point for someone before. So you know when it all started in 2014, right? In Ukraine, the very first in Crimea and Donbas, right? You notice that all the figureheads for the DNR, LNR, and Crimea, all the people that Russia put in charge, right? They were these very fringe losers, right? Like the Motorola guy, like Givy, right? They were nobodies that Russia elevated. So they got to a position of power because of Russia. So they danced to whatever song Russia played, right? And now we have similar thing in the West, right? You have people like Nigel Farage in Britain, for example, right? He knows that if Russia were ever to win in Ukraine and have more influence, they'll support him in England, right? And there is future for him because he's a useful idiot that they can elevate and put in control, right? And it's been the same. So, and if you look at all the people on Twitter, like all the useful idiots that Russia has, right? They're either nobodies, people with criminal record, blacklisted because of their past, right? And they all play up to it because they believe that there'll come a day where Russia will elevate them, where they'll mean something, right? But that's never going to happen.